All right. Welcome to the podcast, Trevor. I'm so excited to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. Sunny weather in Vancouver. Thank you for sending that our way.
Yes, it is not sunny weather in Toronto, so you're welcome. All right. So I want to jump right in. Tell us about Orgmatch and what it is exactly you do, because I think this is very, very interesting and fascinating work.
I'd like to start with the conversation around trust. I don't know if you've noticed, we kind of are having a bit of a trust issue right now in society. And I look at this at a few different levels. One is that, we see friendships that are falling apart, especially among men, which is, highly concerning, among gay men too. And then institutionally, we see a lot of distrust, toward government, toward institutional brands. Um, and this is creating more isolation. This is keeping people apart. And if you're one of these major brands or governments, you're really concerned when you see numbers like a Gallup poll that came out recently showing Gen Z has a minus 84% trust in government and big tech. So that's obviously concerning if you're an incumbent. How do you build this trust back up? And that's where Orgmatch comes in, is we work with companies to help them align their capital with the outcomes that they say that they achieve. So when that's, a company like a bank, like let's say RBC, they're talking about, we help, Black Canadians, we help Indigenous Canadians, we help people get financial skills and literacy. And the way that they do that is they move $200 million of capital every year to those communities to help them get the skill sets, get the opportunities that they're talking about. And when they're able to do that, align that capital to those communities, their trust significantly skyrockets. So Orgmatch is all about aligning those community opportunities, the people on the ground who are doing the work to build the trust, to achieve the outcomes, solve the problems that are in society with the corporate capital, the companies that are so badly in need of that trust right now. They can partner with those communities to gain it back. And so that's what Orgmatch does at our heart. The way that we work with companies is kind of threefold. Either a company isn't currently making community investments right now and they want to know how to do this effectively. The second is, we're doing this, maybe not so well. How do we optimize to get better at it? Make this cost less internally because about costs about 25% of the capital operationally for the company to move it out the door. And then the third is, can we outsource this or can you take on a particular task that we're not skilled at or that we don't have the capacity for? So we'll do particular tasks for a company, whether that's monitoring their incoming inquiries from nonprofit organizations and helping nonprofits navigate grant application systems, or whether it is doing data analytics and research or putting reports together. We can do those different elements, but at the end of the day, we are helping companies discover community opportunities that are authentic, that are grassroots, and that are highly impactful.
Okay, so in saying all that, you heavily work with nonprofits, or do you strictly work with the nonprofits in regards to where the corporate funds are funneling down to?
Our core belief is in the implementation of UN Sustainable Development Goal 17, which is partnerships for the goals. And that is inherently helping nonprofit organizations access capital today that they haven't had access to typically. But the way that we believe in achieving that is actually working with the funders. And so we actually spend our time with Fortune 500 companies and we help them change their systems and processes to one, be more efficient for them because every company cares about their capital allocation, the amount of time spent on tasks, and of course, what the outcomes of those tasks are. So we help them optimize those processes. And by doing that, we actually help flow more capital to grassroots organizations that are really hard to find, that you can't just Google or pull out of a database, that you actually need to like be on the ground and know about, but they can't typically be found. So that's really, I think, where the opportunity lies for those grassroots organizations is we certainly work with them to highlight their work to pull those opportunities forward, and we'll reach out to them at that time. But we start by helping to educate the funder around how their processes can be better and return more for the investments that they're making.
Nice. Okay. And so I want to try and phrase this question so that it's correct. But basically, I want to ask why a company would want to give money to a nonprofit. Like, I understand why, but maybe let's explain it from like the point of view of the company and then the point of view of the nonprofit, because I also know a lot of like nonprofits in this sector don't think of big organizations as like, oh, they're never going to give me money. So, like, explain the why that might happen so that maybe somebody who is nonprofit can think, oh, maybe I should go after this more than I've been thinking.
100%. So the same year that JCPenney went bankrupt was the same year Patagonia posted record profits and just so happened to make the most nonprofit investments in its history. And this is typically the scenario I like to pull out is to say, reputation matters. And, JCPenney's case, they're flooding the airwaves with traditional TV ads to try to increase their reputation and awareness. Patagonia is doing that by giving money to stories that only they can tell. So when I started working with Patagonia in 2017, I went to Bella Bella on the BC Central Coast and I worked with a local nation there, the Healtsick, and they were starting to make more investments in returning people to the land who had left, coming to places like where I live in Vancouver to find opportunity. And they were bringing opportunity back to the land. They had built a big house. They had new energy systems that were coming in that were sustainable. They built a beautiful ecotourism lodge for people to come and visit the land, with full catering services, housing for people to live at. And so when Patagonia learned about this project, they knew they had to be part of it. And what we were able to do was facilitate a 10-year relationship between the nation and the company where you could get consistent investments on the part of Patagonia to help build this vision that they had for their community and achieve it in real time, being a real partner, showing up as they were asked to. And at the same time, Patagonia was able to tell this story to be able to show other communities what was possible and what good partnerships could look like. And that story is why Patagonia has a positive net reputation among Gen Z at a time when all of these other brands are, significantly underwater. And so why would a company want to do this? Well, every company wants to be Patagonia. I've never met a company that I met with was like, oh, that's a bad brand or that's a brand we don't want to be like. So companies are actually have put $80 billion into their budgets this year. This is around the world to give money to nonprofits because in exactly the pursuit of trying to achieve better reputation and regulatory benefits too. There's obviously tax incentives that come into play and obviously government opportunities where they have these expectations of you in order to be able to work with them. So those are the two primary reasons why a company is doing this. What I would say is that when they're putting this money out the door, they're finding that the process of giving money away is not as easy as they had anticipated. And so a lot of it, two things happen. One is a lot of money just gets wasted on operations and admin. And the second thing is a lot of money just defaults to the same organization. So if you're a university or a hospital foundation, you are 30 times more likely to get cash than the rest of the marketplace. 60% of the money is given to 4% of organizations. So that means 96% of the market is fighting for 40% of the cash. And I think that this is obviously why we see a high rate of charitable failure. And it's also why ultimately, in my opinion, a lot of problems aren't being solved because money is being concentrated in the least effective organizations, the least grassroots organizations. So we need to flip that marketplace on its head. And so my belief is in doing so, that's actually going to unlock more opportunity for these businesses. The reason Patagonia has that great reputation is because they're going into grassroots communities no one has heard of before and telling stories of possibility and inspiration. That's really hard to do if you're, a professional consulting firm and your logo is one of 100 showing up on a sponsorship list and next to all of your competitors, right? So differentiation is actually in the interest of the company as much as it is in the interest of the marketplace. So that's ultimately the hope that I have is that like we can actually help companies make more money as we help charities make more money too.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like the changing of the guard is happening in terms of advertising, and the old way of just like putting something in front of somebody's face isn't exactly working anymore, and actually doing the work is what is working. And I mean, I could have told you this like how many years ago? We all could have told you this how many years ago? But when you actually put your money where your mouth is and you do these things that you're not splashing across headlines just to be popular, be like, we did this thing, but actually changing lives in specific ways in specific places, that is what builds that loyalty. And I think a lot of newer up and coming brands, that is kind of the gears that they're shifting towards. I know, especially the younger generations, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, that's what they want to see. That's what we wanted to see. The millennials, we wanted to see that. We just didn't know or necessarily have the tools. And we're the ones who kind of had to figure out the internet and figure out how to bring it all together and connect us all together. And so that all of these things could then start happening. So it makes me happy to see that there are organizations out there doing that. Now, I recognize that there's obviously this pain point for the companies to deliver because you were talking about the funds only going to like these kind of what I would say is the conglomerates of fundraising. You know, we all know those big brands that it's like, oh, just donate to the Red Cross or donate over here because it's easy, it's a default mode. What is some of the ways that you help kind of, or let me rephrase, what pain point is Orgmatch alleviating for those companies? Like, how are you actually bringing together those donations from the company to the smaller organizations?
That's a great question. So the way that we find is most effective is collecting a lot of data that's, typically not available. So we do that through partnerships. We have a web scraper. We have obviously our users are putting data in and helping to build up profiles, almost like a wiki of information. So those are the three areas that our data sets are coming from overall. So we think like number one, have the most data possible to be able to share as much as you can on the most number of organizations. The second challenge is presenting that information the way that the company needs to make a decision. So right now, in both cases, the way that the companies are generally doing this is, I would say, a combination of Google and Excel to try to like basically put together a list in their own criteria and then try to present that in a way that their decision makers will be able to quickly say, yes or no, or we need more due diligence. So I would say it's collecting the data, presenting it in the right way, and then making it really easy for a decision maker to move to the next step. So that's really what we're automating. When we did this for ATB Financial, for instance, it was monitoring about 2,000 hours their team was wasting on Google and Excel, and in terms of just like putting all of this together. And so we were able to do the same process that took them 3 months in 10 minutes. And so that is the level of scale we're looking at because it's like, and then again too, I would say, their information, their data sets, we did an A/B test, right? It was like, okay, let's see what your list looked like, and then let's see what our list looks like. So, we were highlighting organizations they'd never heard of before. And of course, like ATB Financial, very community focused, geographically focused on the province of Alberta, communities where they were working in, where they have employees and they were organizations they'd never heard of before with really cool projects that they wanted to be part of. So that's for us how we kind of surface it is like, pull the list, highlight what those cool opportunities are in the right way, and then like get them excited so that they're starting to have that conversation at their decision-making meeting. So that's what I would say is like the fundamental difference. It's like, automate the admin, the research, and the due diligence as much as we can so that they can just quickly move into a relationship.
Yeah. And it sounds very efficient, and efficiency is one of my core values. So I love it and I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, you're speaking my
It,
language.
oh yeah, like efficiency. I'm just like, oh my God, I love efficiency. It makes me so happy. It sounds like this could also be something that could be applied to the LGBTQ community, maybe not necessarily specifically just for nonprofits, but just like queer businesses in general. I know that the CGLCC is doing a lot of work to try and provide that access and try and connect those dots. Have you put any thought into how this could also affect the, queer community and how it could help their businesses get more funding from these organizations? Even though it's not nonprofit, it still is part of, the DEI-ness of it all.
Of course, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of impact we can have, and the nonprofit sector is not the only way of achieving that. And I think like, our business is a business, but we're a social enterprise. We have a mission. We believe in helping the world. We actually think that that will help us make money, not hinder us from doing so. So that's our fundamental philosophy. I would say my background and the expertise, Tim and I had in starting this business is more in the nonprofit sector, and that's where we've started. But when we were working on our the development of our AI algorithm last year, we looked at a lot of different ways that the matchmaking recommendation engine that we generated could actually solve a number of different problems. Supplier registration, you mentioned that for companies, for instance, even in terms of hiring, looking at this not just on an organizational level, but as an individual candidate to organization level, could we make some recommendations too? So there are certainly future applications there. I would say our focus is still how do we serve this sector in particular and do this really, really well. And we have work to do. I mean, we've got a really good manual process, I would say, in terms of helping the companies to do this. But there's a lot that we can still automate, make more efficient, provide more value through our product. And we really want to serve this community as the one that we do that for first. Once we do that really well, I think it makes sense. How do we get into other markets? How do we help more people? But I think if we did that now, it would be too early and we wouldn't be giving as much value as the community deserves.
Yeah, you still need to really reach that product market fit and get it to a good place and like scale before you can take it. But there's definitely possibilities there. In saying that, I mean, just listening to you speak, I know that the market must be huge, but how big is this market that you're looking at?
So yeah, we're estimating, $80 billion in capital just from like corporations to nonprofits this year, and that's a worldwide level. So about half of that is in the United States. Unsurprisingly, they've really created the model for this. In Canada, we'll be between 1.5 to $2 billion we're estimating. So a significant amount, certainly enough for us to be able to test the marketplace and see um, how we can optimize our processes before we go into the US market or the European market where there's a lot more capital flowing. So, yeah, I mean, Canada has limited opportunity, but we think this is like a really good country to start in because, it's a bit more risk adverse. So if a product is going to work here, I think the likelihood of it working in a US market has good validation and good reason to move into that marketplace. And yeah, I think the other reason is like you've got to be more intentional. Like there's only a few thousand companies that do this in Canada, or a few thousand organizations that do this in Canada. So, we know our customers really well. We get to know them pretty intimately. Whereas, in the US, again, much bigger marketplace, much different. So, our belief is like let's do something really well for a market we really want to serve, and then use that as the beachhead for growth.
Yeah. I want to track back to kind of the companies that maybe aren't giving currently or don't have that in the pipeline. What would you say to those companies?
Yeah, I mean, every business is different, right? I think you have to ask what's working for you, what's not working for you. What I hear generally is traditional marketing is not working. We're in a spam-filled world now where nobody asks for permission anymore. And so people are inundated and therefore are ignored more. So I think what I would say to these companies is if you're not grabbing people's attention and you would like to, reinforce what your core narrative and message is to the public through your community investments. And that's going to be a much more effective means of marketing and getting your story out there than the money you're setting on fire by doing all of those traditional ads, because I mean we know how expensive they are and we know how little they return. So that's what I would say to those companies. But look, I mean, for companies that where reputation is maybe not as big of a concern, maybe this is not something for them. I would obviously still encourage them to take a look at it. I would have them explore the regulatory benefits of doing this work as well and the tax benefits of doing it. But maybe this isn't for every company. But I would say if you are a company that is concerned about your reputation, you certainly should be thinking about what your community investments look like and how they reflect your values and the message you're putting out into the world. Because if there's not alignment between those things, you're adding to distrust. And if you are aligned on those things, you're building trust. So I would just ask which one of the two are you doing?
Very good, very good. All right, shifting gears a little bit because we have lots of entrepreneurs that listen to this. Have you had any investor rounds? We talked about this for a minute before we jumped on, but have you had any investor rounds for Orgmatch, or are you planning any for the future?
We are not currently planning. We've had a false start before where we thought we wanted to fundraise and then during the process discovered that it wasn't for us and we weren't getting the right matches. So we've definitely gotten very close to raising money and then not followed through on it, which isn't an experience in and of itself. I think being a founder, there's a lot of pressures all the time, right? And I mean, one of the most intense pressures is capital and cash flow. How do I keep my balance sheet, you know, going so that I'm not, racking up debts or owing people money that I can't pay back? And how am I making sure the cash is coming in to be able to keep all of those people I need to work with to run my business happy? And we, really, especially in the early days of our business, we weren't sure how we were going to make money. We were really figuring out, what does our price point look like? What is the exact service offering? What's the customer journey we're looking on? Interestingly enough, as we were fundraising, we were getting more customer interest, and enough so that we were able to raise enough customer capital to offset our need to fundraise. And so that was certainly a huge blessing for us. And um, changed the need for us to fundraise. So we haven't gone back to the market since. But we are certainly, yeah, it's certainly something we're thinking about in the future. We do want to scale. We want to be a big company. But we also recognize that like being bootstrapped allows us to show up more authentically, serve our customers the way that we know how to best do without outside interference. And for Tim and I as co-founders, we have a really trusting relationship. And so if we want to bring somebody in to that, we want to have the same level of trust that we have with each other. And I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves if we don't feel that way.
Yeah, especially with the industry that you're in specifically. Like when you get into nonprofit, you really do have to make sure that you're dotting all your I's, crossing all your T's, doing everything with integrity because that's kind of what the company's representing.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. If we, everything we do, I mean, it reflects on us as founders, but yeah, it reflects on our brand, and I have recognized like being a founder is a privilege and it's also a huge responsibility because how I behave, how I act, how I treat people, it's not just the Trevor show anymore. Like I can show up and apologize for who I am, but if it's hurting my business, if it's hurting the people who have trusted in this company, who believe in the mission we have, that's a whole nother thing. So, I have to definitely change how I show up and elevate myself all the time too as a founder to be like, yeah, this is a huge responsibility to have this business, especially when the first thing we talk about is trust, right? It's like, okay, now we're really setting that expectation for ourselves because if we do anything to undermine trust, it's really hard to come back to. There's an expression that, trust is earned in drips and lost in buckets. And I think that's absolutely true.
Definitely, definitely. How was your transition from, working, I guess it was in the public sector because you worked for, you were an elected official at one point. How was it moving from that into the entrepreneurship mindset? Because it is very different worlds.
Very different world. So yeah, how do I explain this? So yeah, I was a locally elected official in Vancouver, 10 years ago now. But yeah, so I was quite young in my early 20s. But it was, kind of the Vancouver Olympics actually allowed me to get into that because I was, long story short, playing hockey. The local park board, the board I was eventually elected to, was basically restricting community sports and nonprofit and society sports in place of major athletes without, giving the community spaces to recreate. And so we fought back against that. And we're like, actually, there's like better ways of doing this, better ways of partnering and working with community. I just so happened that turned into a campaign that got me elected. So I was very lucky, right place, right time. Very interesting experience being, yeah, locally elected official and taught me a lot. But yeah, I went from that, got into the foundation fundraising world and, learned a lot from there, and again, like all about trust, right? Like, when you're a public elected official, okay, how do I build trust with my constituents? Then when you're raising money, how do I build trust with my donors? When I was granting money in the foundation world, after that, it was, okay, well, how do I build trust with both the people's dollars I'm advising and the communities who I'm giving to so that they will still have this relationship with each other that's trusting, even though I'm kind of this middle person, right? So a lot of trust there. So it kind of just reinforced how important trust was, I think, across the board for folks. Interestingly enough, like this business happened by complete accident. I was, living in the UK, actually working for a university, helping them set up a fundraising function for their school, and COVID hit. and kind of just a wrench went into everything. My partner lost his job, my parents got sick. There was a lot of uncertainty in my workplace, and we're like, okay, well, what do we want to do? We moved back to Canada, and had this idea in the back of my head, like, there's got to be a way of automating and simplifying this process around relationship building between the right people who don't know each other, right? And I think that's kind of what got me started on this mission and starting Orgmatch. So complete accident, but also, probably couldn't have happened any other way.
Wow, that sounds like a pretty good story. And then how is the transition into entrepreneurship in like the mental switches of like working for yourself and doing your own thing now?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're like a public official and yeah, you can't like breaking rules as a public official isn't as a non-starter as you might imagine. Whereas in business, like you have to constantly push boundaries and break rules. And so those things are like directly in opposition to each other, I would say, in terms of my mental switch. Because yeah, it's like for me in one mode, showing up with integrity and being authentic meant the public trusts me. I need to, treat every tax dollar like, it's the last dollar on earth and I'm spending it very wisely. I need to make sure like I'm, what I say in public, or like if I'm going to make a promise, I'm going to do my best to achieve it, right? Not that I don't do those things as an entrepreneur, but I find oftentimes like because it's so competitive out there, because there's so much noise, you are constantly having to do things that say, how do I stand out to be seen? Because like that's the only way to move forward right in the business. And yeah, sometimes that's like, hey, I need to like have this megaphone and shout from the rooftops, or do things that like I wouldn't have typically done in my other life. So that's just a very big mindset shift. um in terms of like the mental health component, I think like it's a lot of pressure just in a different way. Like again, being in public life, the pressure is more, how are people feeling about my performance? As an entrepreneur, it doesn't really matter how people feel about my performance if there's no money in the bank and I can't pay my staff. So like the priorities change significantly that way, right? Like I've got to make sure that like, our finances, our capital flow, our trajectory as a business is moving forward, and like my likability and whether people agree with my decision making or not is kind of inconsequential, because my performance is the only thing that matters, and there's an ultimate accountability mechanism in money, right? Agree or disagree with the capitalist system we're in, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's the world we live in, and
That's the
it's
world we live in.
that's the
Yeah.
world we live in. I always I used to be very utopian when I was younger because I think a lot of us are more utopian thinking when we're younger. And then as I got older, I was like, well, you know what? Sometimes you have to be okay with being the villain in some people's stories. Sometimes it's just the way it is.
Well, you have to stand for something, right? I mean, again, like in politics, like, as a public official, I'm like, I'm trying to, you want to listen to people, you want to have a diverse set of views and call into question, what judgments am I making? Am I in line with where the public is at? I don't need to think about where the public is at anymore, right? Like I see the world the way it is. I see the world that, and in terms of how I want to change it, and I need to fight for that because the status quo cannot change unless somebody's fighting for that, right? So just yeah, fundamental difference in how I'm showing up as an entrepreneur that way too.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's usually the crazy ones with the microphones who are actually changing the world.
That's right. I've had to figure that out.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, I'm sure you can change the world just sitting quietly at home, maybe being a coder. Definitely there's ways, but like eventually it will become loud. Like you can't stay quiet forever. If you want to actually make an impact and make a change and do the things, you're gonna have to grab that microphone and shout it very loudly from the top of your lungs to make sure that people are paying attention, because that's how change actually happens.
100%. And, like I think before I was comfortable picking up that megaphone, putting myself out there more, I had to do some work around like, what's my message? Like, how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to talk to people? How do I want to inspire them or leave them with things? And going back to your transition question, really challenging because when I went from kind of like this government and then to this foundation philanthropy world and then to entrepreneurship, like each of those is like kind of a different identity or a different set of skills in a different way. So I was like, which of those is the real me? And it was only through that process where it was like, oh, they're all the real me, and each of them draws different parts of me out. And so, what's the story that binds them together, and how do I want to take the lessons I've learned in each of those capacities forward with me? So, but it wasn't until like I had to do that reflection. I was like, okay, now I know what I stand for, and now I realize what my own story is, and I can tell that to people and maybe help them find their path.
Nice. Well, I think that that's a great place for us to end off on today. Where can people find out about you and what you do?
So you can go to my LinkedIn profile if you type trevorloke.com or trevorloke.ca. It'll just redirect you right there. So please follow, connect if you want to learn more.
Awesome. And where can people find out more about Orgmatch?
You can go to orgmatch.com or you can send an email to info@orgmatch.com and we will be in touch.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that all of that information is in the show notes for everybody. Thank you so much for your conversation today, Trevor. This has been absolutely fantastic.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.